welcome. Good to see everybody. We got a good group, as you will, I'm sure we'll find out. I want to make sure that so people don't think that this is all me here. Introduce the other members of our committee here. So we have Walt Swanson, Nueva España, and we have Paul Delaney. Where's Paul?
There's Paul.
Yes, and Betty Ann Williams. So these are the people that you can complain to if you. Okay. I'm going to take the opportunity to let people know about the next roundtable, which is going to be a Sunday brunch on my God, what's the date? It's June 11th, I believe. And Patrice Gaines, a lot of people know about Patrice, former Washington Post reporter. While she was at the Post, she was convinced that these young men who were convicted of killing a woman named Catherine Fuller, there was enough doubt so that they should not be automatically assumed guilty. They went to jail, anyway, prison. One is out now. The case is going to the Supreme Court. So Patrice will be here to talk about that, along with their lawyer, who's from the Innocence Project, and one of the young man who is free, named Chris. So they'll all be here to talk about what it's like to go through all this and be a real reporter. So you can put that on your save the date list. All right, now we're going to go around as we usually do and introduce ourselves so that people will know who everyone else is. Why don't we start over there with Pat? Pat, why don't you do
Patricia Gaston, an editor at the Washington Post. Betty Ann Williams, independent editor.
Lynn Adrian, director of the DC graduate program in broadcast and visual journalism for the Syracuse University's Newhouse School.
the rest of the
Jean Sadler, Communications Director, Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and former reporter with the Wall Street Journal at the time.
Yes. Arthur Glenville's author. My life, my love, my legacy.
What's the name of that book again?
My life. Memoirs of Loretta Scott King.
Adam Powell, former CBS, NPR, WHUT, now running a multidisciplinary cybersecurity project for University of Southern California.
Cybersecurity, okay. What did you know?
Where's Malcolm?
All right. Okay. Yeah, okay.
A.P. DeBailey, write a column for the Tri-City Wire Service, teach an adjunct professor at the University of District of Columbia, and I'm currently working on August Moss's book about the Ebony Fashion Fair. We can commentate with the Ebony Fashion Fair. We just about finished.
I'm Jeanette Pinckney. I look after my auntie and my elder cousins and so forth and so on. Worked for WIDA, CBS, NBC, Donahue, The Post on a freelance basis for a long time. Oprah freelance. I'll stop there. Okay, I'm Jeanette.
I'm Vernon Smith, Communications Officer with National Ocean Service, formerly with the Dallas Morning News.
Warren Leary, a science technology writer, retired from the New York Times and Associated Press reporter.
Just honored.
But we have to talk about it. Warren just got back from Florida, where he was honored by NASA, and he's got a plaque now with his name on it down in the press room down there.
Miniature copies carried around though?
As one of the people who helped the space program. What was that like? We haven't seen it since then.
Oh, it's one of those. They had each year they induct people who've been influential and have written about the space program for a long time, at least 20 years. And so I was one of 6 selected this year. It's kind of for a body of work kind of thing. And 6 were selected. 2 died before the presentation, so 4 were left. Is there anyone else here who wants to have rewards for a body of work? Do it quickly. Because we don't hang around that long. So it was a nice ceremony. I have a nice framed certificate in that. My wonderful wife went with me, and it was a chance to have a little Florida vacation when we were down there. But it was nice to see the brass plaque up there with Walter Cronkite and some of the other guys who covered space, and to be the first African American on the wall.
All right.
The additional reason to celebrate is, today is.
Oh. Yeah.
One of you.
Today is our 36th wedding anniversary.
All right.
Are we done now?
Okay, I'm Flo Purnell. I manage publications for an Alexandria-based think tank, but I've worked at USA Today. I was managing editor at Emerge magazine. I've been through People, NPR, and some other publications.
Okay. Dwight and Paul, okay, your turn.
Dwight Ellis, full-time professor, communications professor at Bowie State University.
Gregory Clay, the original one, freelance writer, Washington, D.C.
Jessica Lee, I'm a recovering journalist.
I'm Walt Swanston Nuevo España, and I'm a retired print and broadcast journalist and Association Executive Journalism Association, including Unity.
Yeah.
And NABA.
Okay, Paul.
Paul Galimi, I spent most of my career at the New York Times.
Period.
Oh, you know, Paul, I don't want to mean with it. I'm going to get the whole list again. You wouldn't dare.
Since Paul is on the floor, and we're in Mr. Henry's, and a lot of people may not know the history of journalism and Mr. Henry's, but Paul does. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about...
Well, when I was at the Washington Star, 6 blocks away, and Mr. Henry's was our watering hole. After work, just about every day, we gathered here, and Henry was just starting this upstairs room as a jazz room. And some of the first people he had, there was Howard students, the Rick Powell Trio. I don't know if anybody remembers Rick. Rick Powell had a trio. Rick played piano, but singing for Rick were Roberta Flack, Donny Hathaway, and so we would leave the Star and come by here to listen to those folks just about every night. I mean, there was no cover charge. The drinks were cheap, so we kind of made this our home. And of course, the rest is history for Donnie and Roberta. Rick went back to Chicago. He was from Chicago, and he played jazz around Chicago for years. But that was the big and Henry. One thing, Mr. Henry loved reporters, so we were always welcome here. We had tabs and had our way, and had a good time.
And if you look over here on that wall, you see Roberta Flack's first album, First Take, which was recorded here. And you can see in the background the same wood panel that, still exists over here. They made an effort to preserve it.
Which
so
one?
If you get a chance.
Which one is it?
Yeah.
Oh, this one in the corner. Okay.
Because that's it, right, that background is it. Okay, Miranda.
I'm Miranda Spivak. I am doing some work for the Center for Investigative Reporting and commuting to a teaching job at DePauw University, where, by the way, they have an opening, which if anybody wants to hear about it, I'll tell you all about it. And Southwest flies there directly, so it's manageable. And I used to work at the Washington Post for almost 20 years.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kia Johnson. I'm a television producer at Reuters News Service.
My name is Daniel Anderson. I'm a freelance photojournalist. Just recently arrived to DC, and hoping to get to know all you guys a little better.
I'm Yvette Cabrera. Nice to meet you all. I just moved here with Daniel, my husband. I just started a new job at Think Progress. I joined their investigative team. I cover criminal justice and immigration and environmental issues, and of course Trump. And I'm an immediate past president of CCNMA, which is an a nonprofit journalism group in California that works on diversifying newsrooms. So I hope to continue my work here on diversifying newsrooms, and glad to be here as well. Thank you.
And I'm Gloria Minot. I'm with WPFW Radio Pacifica. So there you have it.
We're just having a fun drive now, aren't we?
We're having
fun drive.
We're always having fun.
Okay, good. And I'm Richard Prince, and I write a column about diversity issues in the news business called Journal-ism. Somebody's trying to that touched the chord with somebody. And so that's okay. Oh yeah, we'll hear that. We also want to talk about what Janice is doing here, and she can introduce herself.
Okay, I'm Janice Temple. Turn this around. And so normally I do Periscope. So I'm a live streamer, social media addict, I guess. And tonight I'm doing Facebook Live. So it's at DMV District, Maryland, Virginia. Black History Field Trips. That's the site that it's going to be on, and then I will share it out to Richard, and then everybody will be able to see it and comment or share it from Facebook Live. So that's what we're doing tonight. Oops.
Sharing, fun, still having fun. Still having huge fun. Southeast, yes.
You just had an exhibit.
And I have an exhibit up at the Talbot Bing Gallery on about an art walk in the Brooklyn section. And I have 2 pictures down at the new art museum down at National Museum of Art. So I got 3 pictures up down there too. So I'm having fun.
Former White House photographer.
That's right.
Yes.
Right. Well, I'm Dwight's friend. I'm Paul Delaney's friend. I know stuff. I know stuff about Jeanette. Barbara. About people.
And you, take it away. Sorry. Take it away. It's your turn to introduce myself. Sure. Well, you can do both. You can do both, I guess.
Okay. My name is Hugh Price. I've had 12 or 13 careers, so I won't walk through at this point, but I will walk through some of them.
Oh, wait, here's the
And first, let me just thank Richard for inviting me, and thank everyone for coming out, and also want to thank my lifelong friend and high school classmate Dwight for introducing me to Richard. So it's a wonderful evening and a great opportunity to make new acquaintances and to renew acquaintances. I was invited to come talk a bit about a memoir that I've just published. The title is This African American Life. There are a couple of copies floating around. I'll retrieve them at the end. They're kind of banged up, but it came out on May 2nd. And this memoir was 13 years in the making. Or 14 years. I originally started working on it in 2003, right after I left the presidency of the National Urban League, and had a terrific agent. Many of you may know her, Marie Brown, fabulous agent. And she really believed in the book, and she tried to shop it to commercial publishers, and the feedback was, we're not interested in this book, we would like you to write a book about what it was like to deal with Bill Clinton. And I said, I'm not interested in writing that book, so we had a little standoff. And it's instructive. This book sat in my laptop for 13 years, and I didn't touch it. And I brought it out a couple of years ago and started to update it with an eye toward trying to bring it out. It's very much a labor of love, and my purpose in doing it was basically to try to lay down a record of our ancestry and my career for my children and nieces and nephews and their children, and if anybody else got to read it, it was great. I was prepared to self-publish it. I'd had experience with that a couple of years ago. But I said, let me see if I can find a commercial publisher, and I was blessed to be able to find a wonderful publisher in the South by the name of John F. Blair Publisher. Very small operation, but they really worked with me to create the book that I wanted to write. Now it's out and it's off to the races. This is the first week of the book tour, and so I'm quite delighted. The impetus for writing the book was to try to share a bit about my rather unusual ancestry. I'm very fortunate my mother was a professional archivist and librarian who actually trained with Dorothy Porter in the Moreland Room. And she and her sister dug out everything I know about our ancestry. And she left it all, if you can believe this, in folders with typed labels. Do you realize how lucky that is? Because I had no patience at all to do what she spent much of her life doing, but I'm really fortunate. I've also had a very unorthodox and improbable career. I may have been one of the earliest diagnosed cases of professional ADD. Couldn't sit still. Most of my jobs were for 2 years. I spent 5 years at the New York Times, 6 years a couple other places, and 9 at the Urban League. But over the course of a 50-plus year career, I rarely sat still. Along the way, I've had some fascinating experiences and exposures, and also had an opportunity to reflect on the nature of leadership, particularly once I became the head of the National Urban League. I looked in the mirror and I said, damn, I'm one now. Let me figure out what this role is, and let me see what I can learn about leadership. So those were the major driving forces in deciding to write the book. The ancestors are interesting, and they're all accidents in history. None of this was by design. But one of my ancestors was a man by the name of Nero Hawley. He's probably my great-great-great. I'm going to drop a few greats in there by the time the direct descendant. Nero Hawley fought in the American Revolution at Valley Forge under the command of General George Washington. He was one of the African Americans out of Connecticut who was offered an opportunity to win his freedom in exchange for serving in the Revolutionary War. And he did that, and he subsequently won his freedom. One of the amazing experiences in conjunction with being an ancestor of Nero was that in 1995, not long after I became the head of the National Urban League, there was a major exhibition of first editions in New York, and Johnny Cochran, who just won the OJ case, was the featured celebrity, and my wife and I went. And they had a big, thick catalog, and I bought it. I didn't crack the cellophane. I just sent it to my mother. And about 2 days later, she called and said, do you realize what's in this collection? Actually, no, I don't. In the collection was an original treasury note signed by my ancestor in the early 1800s, which was his compensation for serving in the military.
Wow.
And I set out to get it. I called the person who had put together the collection and said, I'd really like to buy this. And he said, well, the owner is a professional collector. He won't part with it. And I said, okay. I called him about a week later. I'm kind of pig-headed, by nature. I called him a week later and I said, I'd really like to have this. I'm the president of the National Urban League. That's a very important job. And he said he's not going to part with it. I called him another week later. I said, say it loud. I'm blocking my pride. I want that document. He didn't part with it then. And I called one more time. I said, listen, Master, please let me have that document. He didn't part with it then. So I finally called about the 6th time, and I said, look, this is a document that means everything to my family, and it's just another piece of paper for your collector. So I bought it. And it was delivered to me in a cellophane wrapping in my office in the league. And I held it up, I opened it up. I can't begin to tell you what it's like to hold something that your ancestor had signed in the late 1700s. It was like holding a peeling of his skin. So I called my mother and said, she lived on the Cape at the time, we were in New York. I said I wanted to come up and visit. And we got to her house, and we sat around the breakfast table as we always do. And I just took it out and I slid it across. I said, "This is yours. This is yours." And it was an amazing experience. Now, in those times, the DAR really wasn't interested in acknowledging that black folks had anything to do with the revolution. They didn't admit anybody. When I was a kid, I used to tease my mother, how are you doing this because you want to be one of the first blacks in the DAR? Well, lo and behold, in the either late 1990s, early 2000s, I got a call from a curator at the DAR, and they were putting together an exhibition on blacks and Native Americans who had fought the American Revolution. They had finally come to terms. And I told them about the documentary, and so there was the documentary. There was a whole piece in the exhibition about Nero. Another very interesting set of ancestors is my great-great-grandfather, great-great-grandmother, George and Rebecca Latimer. They were slaves in Norfolk. He was very fair-skinned. She was very brown-skinned. They decided in September of 1842 to escape. They stowed away on a boat, got as far as somewhere around Baltimore, came above board. Then they traveled as master and slave for a spell, and then they traveled as husband and wife the rest of the way to Boston. The person who had worked for the slave owner spotted George in Boston and set out to try to recapture him, and it became a cause célèbre, one of the early efforts to resist the seizing of fugitive slaves. William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass rallied around their cause and prevented his recapture. There was a settlement, and George Latimer was freed. It's all over the web. It's a fascinating story, so much so that John Greenleaf Whittier wrote a poem about George Latimer's case called From Massachusetts to Virginia. The Latimers had several children, one of whom was my great-grandmother, Margaret Latimer, another of whom was my great-uncle, Louis Latimer, the inventor who helped Alexander Graham Bell perfect the application for his patent so he could be the first in line for the telephone patent. And then he also perfected the carbon filament light bulb that Edison invented, but that burned out very fast. And Louis Latimer created a new carbon filament that extended the life of it. I was such a knucklehead when I was young that, again, I was not into ancestry. I used to date a girl who lived in Brooklyn. I grew up in Washington. I'd go to visit her in Brooklyn, and my mother arranged for me to stay with Louis Latimer's daughter, my Aunt Louise, in the family house. I would sleep in his bedroom, in his bed. My Aunt Louise would say, "Come to the breakfast table. I want to tell you all about your famous great-uncle." And I said, "Right now I have to go to Brooklyn. So how do I get to the BQE? What exit do I get off of to go to Midwood?" I completely blew the opportunity to learn about my famous great-uncle, about his sister, my great-great-grandmother, and about their parents, George and Rebecca Latimer. So whenever I talk to young people, I say, don't be stupid like me. Whether somebody's famous or not, collect those stories. And lastly, an ancestor I want to mention was a man by the name of Robert Gunnell, who lived in McLean, Virginia, on Old Georgetown Pike. In the 1840s, he purchased his freedom. He then purchased his wife and children and owned them as slaves in order to prevent other slave owners from acquiring them. And at the time of the Emancipation Proclamation in D.C. in 1863, he was paid several $1,000s for the involuntary liberation of his property. He was one of the handful of African-American slave owners in this country. And lastly, my mother's family particularly has a kind of complicated history around race. My mother's parents are African American, mixtures of mulattoes and Virgin Isles and everything. And they're very fair skinned. And so they thought they could get away with passing up in New Haven. But they had 10 children. And, you know, DNA don't lie. And the early children came out very fair. But then some swarthier and swarthier children started popping out of my grandmother's womb. 3 of the older siblings of my mother crossed over to live as white and vanished from the radar screen. They didn't vanish from Ancestry.com. I found 2 of them. But one of them did vanish completely. And interesting enough, the child of that one has reconnected with me in recent years. But that was really painful because my dad was a very handsome, very brown-skinned man, and he was courting my mother. And her parents really treated him hard. They even treated their brown-skinned children hard. The father would not speak to his brown children on the streetcar in New Haven. Can you believe that? In the 50s, my grandmother moved in with one of the daughters who had crossed over to live in White in Staten Island. She died in 1963. My wife and I were living in New Haven. One of my aunts, swarthier aunts, was living in New Haven. My mother was living in D.C. My mother's sister brought their mother to New Haven and buried her before they told any of the brown children that the mother had died. You don't forget those kinds of things. And I write about that because that's the pain associated with racial classifications and racial intolerance and all this stuff. And so those are some of the harder sections of the book to write. But it was important to me. As I mentioned, I grew up in Washington, D.C. I was at Sankofa Bookstore yesterday. It was wonderful. I was 3 blocks from Freedman's Hospital where I was born and 6 blocks from New Hampshire Avenue Park Road where I lived. So I was right in the heart of the village that raised me. We had some fascinating neighbors near us on New Hampshire Avenue Park Road. They included Charles Hamilton Houston. I'm sure everybody knows who he is. Todd Duncan, who performed as Porgy and Bess, was a neighbor. And Sam Lacey, the Crusading Sports Reporter, was a neighbor of ours. He lived right on Park Road between Georgia Avenue and New Hampshire Avenue. Those of us of a certain age who grew up in Washington know that Washington was a rigidly segregated city. The movie houses are segregated, the schools are segregated. If you wanted to buy something in a downtown department store, you could buy it, but you couldn't try it on. There were maybe only 2 restaurants, white restaurants in Washington that served black folks. And you didn't venture outside the city limits. There was just no reason to go to. PG County was a white county when I was a kid. How things have changed. My mother was very active in integrationist and civil rights causes. She crusaded for voting rights for D.C. When I was a kid, we could not vote for the President of the United States, and we could not elect a mayor. And she also was a crusader for school integration. She never told me that she and my dad helped to bankroll some of the school desegregation lawsuits that Charles Hamilton Houston brought. I didn't discover that until I was wandering uncharacteristically through the index and the footnotes of the book. I don't normally do that. And I saw that they were listed there as contributors to those efforts. Dwight and I can testify to what it was like to be among the pioneers. I forget where he went to middle school, but I was part of the first contingent of black students to integrate the D.C. schools in 1954 when I went into Taft Junior High School. And I had a very early encounter with institutional racism. We were accustomed to in-your-face racism. No, you can't go here. No, you can't go there. But I remember getting a rather prestigious internship during the summer between my junior and senior years in high school. I went to Coolidge High School. And I'd been a very strong student in science and math, and so it was a pretty prestigious thing to get. And they took it upon themselves to, and I was the first black student to get one of those internships, they took it upon themselves to give us a test to predict our future prospects. And I will never forget being called in and told what my prospects were. At the age of 16, I was told I probably would get to go to college, but that I should not count on going to graduate school or professional school. Fortunately, I had the presence of mind to tell my parents what I had been told. They said, pay no attention to that, just keep on trucking. But that was the first encounter with something other than in-your-face racism, that subtler stuff that grabs you by the belt and holds you back, and you don't even know who's got the hand on your belt. And we had similar encounters with guidance counselors. I grew up as a rabid baseball fan. The other blessing of the village that raised me was at Griffith Stadium, where the Washington Senators played. It was on the site of the Howard University Hospital. I used to go to 40 or 50 baseball games a year. I swore I was going to become a major leaguer. My mother used to say, you know, just in case you can't hit a curveball, you really got to do well in school, and you should read the classic books. And I said, tell you what, I'll read the classic comics. So we cut a compromise. But she was right, I could not hit a curveball. And but the highlight of my baseball experience, I see the gentleman with the Jackie Robinson t-shirt, in 1952 or thereabouts, Art Carter, who wrote for the Afro and who was another neighbor across the street on New Hampshire Avenue, came up on our porch in spring. He said, the Dodgers are coming to town on the last leg of spring training. Do you want to meet Jackie tonight? I said, let me check my schedule. I'll be right back. And I met Jackie, and there's a wonderful picture in the Afro called Small Fry Meet Dodgers Big Guy. Remember those kinds of captions? That was amazing. But Jackie was a deity. Jackie wasn't a hero, he was a deity. And he was fresh from spring training. His skin was jet black. You remember how handsome he was, and his hair started to turn to gray. I thought God walked out. Fast forward to early career in New Haven. I graduated from law school in 1966, and we had riots in New Haven in 1967. And shortly after the riots, I was asked to become the executive director of a new group that was formed called the Black Coalition of New Haven, to try to put the pieces of the city back together again and rebuild harmony among the races. I was a tender age of 26 years old, so it was quite an experience early on. I learned a lot. I grew up in a hurry. The police were deeply concerned about what activist groups like ours, were doing. We were wiretapped at home. You could hear the device on the phone. And we were infiltrated. And I learned some lessons. I've never forgotten about that. We had major concerns about police-community relations, and we once met about midnight with all the people involved in our organization and came up with a 7-point plan for improving police-community relations. And we scheduled a press conference in the afternoon around 4 o'clock so we could hit the evening news. Well, it turns out the police chief had a revelation about 2 o'clock in the morning, and he announced a 7-point plan to improve police community relations to the semicolon of what we'd done. And I was 26. I said, okay, I see the picture now. And we had other meetings where young brothers who, used to like to carry guns and stuff would say, let's go off the pigs, let's do this and that. And I would stand up and I'd say, I don't know who's going to see the police chief after the meeting over. I don't know where the bug is, but I, Hugh Price, ain't got nothing to do with this nonsense. I subsequently learned in an article in the Hartford Courant that they thought I was one of the dangerous people, but they could never get anything on me. It's because I didn't do anything. But those were times when you grew up in a hurry. I also had a lot of exposure to the Black Panther Party in New Haven, and I was worried because they recruited openly. They had these mysterious organizers come into town and get the school children all riled up, and the kids would run around throwing Molotov cocktails, and the kids would get arrested, but the organizers didn't. I said, that's strange. I don't know who these folks are. So we were cooperative, but we kept a bit of a distance. And I think there's a little bit of an object lesson in there about infiltration and disintermediation for any groups that are kind of open source movements now. It's very hard to know who you're dealing with. The other thing that was interesting is that Kingman Brewster, who was a brilliant strategist, remarkable man, hired as his head of community affairs in New Haven a man by the name of Tracy Barnes, who was a lifetime CIA operative and one of the designers of the Bay of Pigs. So unbeknownst to us, this kind of bush-mouthed, nondescript looking guy was a world-class spook, the first white spook I ever met in my life. And he was keeping an eye on things for Kingman. So, again, a lot of growing up in a hurry. I got a call out of the blue a few years later from Max Frankel of the New York Times. I was in city government at the time, and he said, I'm calling to let you know you're under consideration for appointment to the editorial board of the New York Times. And I thought to myself, first, well, we hadn't done anything recently in New Haven that warranted coverage by the Times, and number two, was the editorial board, a group you get together for lunch every quarter just to offer some feedback on how the newspaper is doing. He said, no, this is a job writing editorials full time. I said, why me? I had no journalism background. But I auditioned for it, and they were recruiting for someones to succeed Roger Wilkins, recently departed friend, who had left, I think, to come to the Post, or wherever. And they actually hired two of us, which probably made Roger proud that it took two of us to cover him. But the other fellow was a fantastic guy by the name of Robert Curvin, who passed away recently. So we joined the Times. That was an amazing, amazing experience working there. Rarefied atmosphere, brilliant people. I would never have predicted that I would get to pick 95% of the topics of the editorials I wrote, and that what I wrote, the position I wrote, turned out to be the position of the paper in about 98% of those times. The only time an editorial veered off in a different direction was when I wrote about the fairness doctrine, which I believed in, and the Times, as a First Amendment institution, did not believe in. So they used 4/5 of my editorial, and they just inserted a different conclusion. But it was a great experience. I got a little restless, as is my wont. I remember going to see Max Frankel, the editor, and saying, I'm getting a little bored writing for the 10th time that President Reagan should do this or that. And he said to me, what makes you think anybody's read it the first time? What makes you think that it has affected how anybody thinks about it after they've read it the 5th time? And what makes you think that they have changed their behavior after you've written it the 10th time? Go back and write it some more. But I was a little too restless for that. I also had experienced the strike. Paul Delaney will remember that. We moved to New Rochelle, New York in July 18th of 1978, and on August 9th we went out on strike, and we were out for 3 months. I lost 1/4 of my income. And we got a very modest settlement in the strike. And I said, I can't do this again, because I would never catch up, and I had a daughter who was about to go to college. And lastly, I've always sort of oscillated between active and contemplative roles. Contemplative, writing, thinking, reflecting, analyzing. Active, creating stuff, running stuff, operating stuff. And I began to get, frankly, concerned that, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but if I was thought of as a writer in perpetuity, people would lose sight of the fact that I can run stuff. And so I became anxious to get back into the game of running things. And so for all of those reasons, I also talked to Max about how I might get ahead. I said, I'm writing an editorial. Supposing I wanted to be a syndicated columnist. And he said, line forms at the rear of people who've been at the Times for 30 years. I said, what if I want to go on the business side of the paper? We don't think of you as business people. So I said, well, I'm in a beautiful tree-lined cul-de-sac here. There's nowhere to go. It's a great place to be, but there's nowhere to go. And so I sent out signals that I was open to making a change. And I was approached by the president of the public television station in New York, WNET, another improbable move. And he recruited me to become the senior vice president in charge of the Metropolitan Division, which was local programming, local scheduling, and pledge. And I did that for 1.5 years, and it was kind of interesting. And then I was made senior vice president in charge of the entire national production division. I ran the division that produces great performances, Nature, American Masters, Childhood, all of those great series that came out of PBS. And I was asked to do that even though I did not have any background in television and I didn't know how to operate a VCR. And I'll never forget the first meeting with all these world-class Peabody Award-winning producers who had this quizzical look on their face help me understand why you, as someone with no experience in television, plus it's 1984, you're black, help me understand why you're my boss. I don't get it. And I didn't have a ready answer. I knew I was going to have to figure out an answer. But I didn't have a ready answer except I am. And one of the things we set out to do right away is there had been a habit of kind of runaway budgets, so we clamped down on that. But I also knew that we've got all these incredibly brilliant people, and the kind of program development cupboard was bare. And so we had to reignite the creative energies, and we did that. And we had to go out and raise money, because I said, if all of that intelligence is confined to a small space, they'll drive each other crazy. Let's get these folks out abroad in the world making television. They'll be happy, we'll be happy. So the way we had to do that was to generate money. So I spent a lot of time traveling all over Europe and generating co-production deals. As a matter of fact, maybe the last time I saw Paul Delaney was in Madrid when I was on one of those trips, and I don't know what Paul was doing there, probably writing a story about the Prado or something. But that was an amazing experience to gallivant around Europe doing co-production deals. I also got deeply involved in saving the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour from an early demise. It's not a frequently told story, but after the first year of the expansion from a half an hour to an hour, the public television stations were very unhappy with the NewsHour. They didn't like the pacing. Jim Laird had a heart attack. And so they were still in their shakedown cruise. So we went to the annual convention of the public television system, and in those days, the money for production was voted on by a plebiscite. The stations voted on it. And they took a straw poll at the first meeting, and only about 40% of the stations voted to renew the NewsHour. And that was a frightening moment, because if that vote held, it was going to go down for the count after 1 year. And being a kind of brazen person, and everybody else was kind of, our team was frozen in the tracks, I said, I got to get up and see if I can stop this train. So I went up on the stage, and I said, I introduced myself. I had just taken over as the head of national production. I hadn't wanted to meet this way. But I really hope that you all would suspend judgment on the NewsHour and let us find out what the issues are. And please don't rush to judgment. The whole point of public television is to do things that aren't done in commercial television and to be patient. And you can hear it buzz in the room where folks are going, who the hell does this Negro think he is? Be telling us about our industry. But a funny thing happened. The very next day, a number of station managers got up on stage and said, in effect, I think we've rushed to judgment. Let's let this percolate for a while. We then set out to try to find out what the issues are. I promised to visit a number of stations around the country. In the next vote, we got it up to about 45%, but you needed about 55% to get over. So we started calling the stations that were ambivalent about renewing. And some of them were, first, we had the largest market, the most valuable air. Everybody who produced one of their programs to be on our air in prime time. And we had a weighted vote, so we had a lot of leverage. And I remember calling some of the stations that were ambivalent and saying, I see that you all haven't decided about the NewsHour and what are the issues, and they would tell us. And I said, well, we really would like to have your vote. They said, well, I don't know. I said, well, you know, we're revisiting our primetime schedule on Sundays, and we think that maybe some shows that are on at 9 p.m., like yours, ought to be on at 2 o'clock in the morning. You can't do that. You want to find out? This is what's called reciprocity. And so we got the vote, renewed the NewsHour, and the rest is history. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. I made a run for the presidency of the NewsHour, of the station in 1987. It didn't happen. It was a crushing experience. It would have been an opportunity to make history. Frankly, I was very impressed by the breakthroughs by people like Clifton Wharton and Vernon Jordan and others who were smashing glass ceilings. And even though I had run the largest production company in public television, running the station would have been another glass ceiling for us. But I and several of the insiders only got a 20-minute interview, and I was really bent out of shape. I didn't get depressed, but I was disconsolate. And about 3 months later, in this funk, my eldest daughter, who was quite spiritual at the time, said, don't worry about not getting that job. You're being saved for something more important. And I had no idea what she was talking about, and it didn't materialize for a while. But the experience did snap my connection to the station, and I decided to that if something attractive came along, I'd go. And a buddy of mine became president of the Rockefeller Foundation. And I wrote him a letter with all sorts of suggestions about what the foundation might do. Hint, hint, I'm available. He got the point, and I became vice president of the Rockefeller Foundation. I'll speed up a little bit. Had some remarkable experiences there, not the least of which was being on a trip to Southern Africa, which was orchestrated by Jim Joseph. We were in Cape Town on February 2nd, 1990, the day that de Klerk delivered the speech, changing everything. We were in Durban when the beaches were integrated. I was out on the streets photographing the demonstrations that day. It was like the experience of the March on Washington, where I served as a marshal, except the prospect of victory in '63 was off in the distance. We didn't know what would happen and when. The folks in Cape Town on February 2nd knew they'd won. They didn't know exactly what they won, but they were going to win something that day. And of course, it was huge. On the way back from South Africa, we stopped in Harare, had a quite long meeting with President Mugabe, who was not quite as zany as he is now. And then we had a fascinating meeting with human rights groups in Zimbabwe. And they were tolerating some activities and diminution of civil liberties, which kind of surprised us. And so, being a formal editorial writer and a lawyer, I decided to put my mouth in it. So I said to them, I assume that many of you are trained in Western systems and understand freedom of speech, press, association. How do you feel about the constraints on civil liberties here in Zimbabwe? And that put the room into an uproar. They said, how dare you ask? Are you CIA? It took about 10 minutes for things to calm down. Then they offered some explanations. Well, the regime has to keep a lid on things because it might be tribalism, or it might be South Africa up to mischief, or we've got to manage people's expectations. And traveling with our entourage was a young man from the African National Congress. And after all of these explanations by the human rights activists, he stood up and said, my sisters and brothers from Zimbabwe, I cannot begin to tell you how it crushes my heart to hear you rationalize away the freedoms we have just given our lives to obtain. And the human rights folks had no rejoinder in the meeting adjourned. It was an amazing experience. In 1994, I was recruited to become the president of the National Urban League. It was the job of a lifetime. In retrospect, it was obviously the more important thing that I was being saved for. It was, as somebody who loves running things, improving things, involved in policy, just everything that you could ever imagine was in play. My first speech made quite a splash. It was probably the pinnacle of my professional career. The coverage was remarkable. The New York Times had a major front page piece about it. E.J. Dionne wrote about it. Bill Raspberry wrote about it. Excerpts of it were run as op-eds all over the country. It was a startling experience. I got to appear on the Today Show with Brian Gumbel. I didn't learn that until about 12 midnight, and I had already liquored up pretty good by then. And so I had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and pray that my mouth would work. I think I got through it now. But it was a great experience. We concentrated on academic achievement, on the theory that our whole mission is to get folks into the economic mainstream, and you can't do that if you're not educated and prepared for citizenship. We took a program that had started with the urban leagues in the South. That was sort of a national, it was the McKnight Achiever Society that really celebrated kids, black kids who earned B averages or better in school. We took it national. I'll never forget the induction ceremony at Bayview Baptist Church in San Diego, where 350 African American children were inducted into this honor society. all of whom had B averages, and half of whom were boys. Half of whom were boys. There were 1,800 well-wishers in the church. It was incredible. So I knew that we could get the kids' attention. We spent a lot of time on issues of police brutality, racial profiling, stop and frisk. A lot of tension around those issues. We had a meeting at Ed Lewis's office with Al Sharpton and others, and we sort of had a division of labor. I said, Reverend Al, you're brilliant at getting folks out on the street. We want to smoke out President Clinton because he was hiding. We could not find him on this issue. I used to go to meetings in the White House, sit next to the president, bring the latest press clipping about this kid had been shot in the back or that one who'd been frisked. I slide it under his nose and I said, Mr. President, you have to deal with this, and he wouldn't. So we had a big press conference in February of 1990 where I figured some of the press follows me, but they definitely follow Jesse, they follow Kwesi, they follow Reverend Al. And so we invited all of the high-profile African-American leaders, including the CBC, invited the head of La Raza, the head of the Asian American Society, the Anti-Defamation League. I called it our Strange Bedfellows press conference. And the press covered it, and it was piped into the White House through low-power television, and we got the president's attention. And he said to me, after he did his Saturday speech, the first time he had addressed these issues, that I want you to meet with Charles Ruff, the White House counsel, remember the wheelchair-bound lawyer who had defended him? And so I went to meet Ruff, and I said, I'd like to understand just why are you all missing in action? And he said, well, our analysis, to be perfectly frank, is that since African Americans are the principal victims of violent urban crime, that your community would be willing to sacrifice some civil liberties in exchange for greater safety. And I said, at least now I know why you're missing in action, but you're wrong. We want both. We can have both. So we're just going to have to keep pressuring you. To their credit, they did swing into action and start to put a lot of pressure on the Ramparts police in LA, and we made some headway, but of course it's a very, very tough time. Spent a lot of time on affirmative action when I was with the League. Did so many debates with Ward Conley on television. We thought about syndicating our show and going on the road with it. Spent a lot of time on Fox and CNN. I did spend a lot of time on Bill O'Reilly's show, Sean Hannity, Crossfire with Pat Buchanan. Some people you say would feel sorry for you. I said, you know, I'm a lawyer. I have a perverse sense of humor. I enjoy this stuff. It's like a joust. You put on your armor, you grab your spear, you get up on your horse, and you see who sticks who. And they'd say, don't let O'Reilly bully you. I said, not a problem. It's going to be okay. And the other thing I knew is that it was a talk show. And so silence is deadly on a talk show. I once was asked to come on the O'Reilly Factor to talk about diversity in Silicon Valley. I said, okay, we're all about diversity. I get on there, first segment, first question from Matt O'Reilly is, why is Jesse Jackson extorting money from Silicon Valley? I said, Bill, that's not what your producer says you want to talk about. Why is Jesse Jackson extorting money from Silicon Valley? I said, I don't work for the man. I'm not his president. I don't know what he's doing. But I got nothing to say. Why is Jesse Jackson extorting money from Silicon Valley? I said, I got nothing to say, so we're just going to sit here and be quiet. I know you either have to throw me off the show, or we'll move on to another subject, which we did. So you had to go on with a sense of what you're prepared to talk about and not be so seduced by the sound of your voice or by your powers of suasion that you get sucked into something that you don't want. A couple other quick stories, and then we'll move on. In 1995, at the same time as the Million Man March, the chair of our board organized the Time Magazine news tour. They took a whole bunch of corporate leaders on a tour of the world. We did an 8-day, 6-nation round-the-world trip. And since it was my board chair, I saluted and went. We went to Havana, Bangalore, India, Moscow, Hanoi, and Hong Kong. During the course of that trip, Janetta Cole was the other nonprofit executive on the trip. We spent a lot of time talking with Norm Pearlstein and John Huey of Time Magazine about how magazines ought to cover the Million Man March. And we said, you know, one way you could cover the march is for you all to focus on, or other magazines to focus on Farrakhan. What's Farrakhan want? What's he up to? So the other way you could focus is, why did 1 million people come? Why did all of them come? What are they looking for? And they were persuaded by that argument. So if you were to look back at September 30th, 1995, you'll see the cover of Newsweek, a photo of Farrakhan on the entire cover, half in shadow, half in darkness, something like, what does Farrakhan want? The cover of Time magazine was black men and children in radiant color, and the theme was, "We too sing America." African American men march in search of hope, strength, and one another. So that conversation during one of the legs of the trip produced that. A couple years later, we had a National Urban League conference focused on economic power, the next civil rights frontier, and I approached Pearlstein and Hugh again and said, I got an idea for an issue of Fortune for you. Why don't you do a major takeout on African Americans who have ascended to the highest ranks of corporate America? And I wrote up a bunch of story ideas, being rather presumptuous, about a 10-page memo, and said, you know, if I was putting together this issue, I'd do this story and that story and the other story. Of course, they said, okay, fine. That became, anybody remember that issue of Fortune called The New Black Power? Trifold, full-color phone. That was that issue. It came out of that conversation in the memoir I wrote. So we had a lot of, they were able to use a lot of leverage. I think I'll stop there. I had thoughts about leadership, which we can talk about, but I've talked enough. I'll just close with saying that, and a lot of this has to do with interaction with the media. I was blessed that the coverage came in volume and easily early in my tenure with the league. It quieted down, as it invariably does, and at one point I got kind of frustrated, so I went to see some editor friends of mine in various press organs. I won't name any. But I was literally told, if you don't have soap opera in your organization, we're not interested. If you don't have a celebrity fronting what you're doing, we're not interested. Or if you don't have, if you're not operating on one ideological extreme or the other, we're not interested. Or lastly, we're just not interested. And out of frustration, I went to see my good friend Bob Johnson, who was leader of BET. And I said, I want to create a cable, National Urban League cable channel. And he said, you really don't want to do that because technology is moving really fast. It'll cost you a lot of money to create it and to run it and to get on one of the preferred channels on the cable systems. He said, internet's moving like at warp speed. And in very short order, you will be able to bypass the gatekeepers, and you will have access to audiences as of right. All you have to do is create the content and generate the audience. And he was prescient. He was prescient. That's the world we live in today. So enough said. It's been a remarkable journey, an improbable journey, and I've told you about 6 out of the 12 stops along the way. Thank you very much.
Okay, who has questions? And now we do have to talk about the current political situation too. Current political situation. Yes, right, exactly. All right, who has questions?
Yeah, I enjoyed your presentation, but I was wondering with the issues that are affecting African Americans today, how do you grade what the Urban League is doing, and what you think they should be doing?
With all due respect, I'm not going to answer either question today. Let me just say, the mission of the Urban League is to help folks get into the American mainstream, climb out of poverty and working class status and get into the middle class. That is the work of the Urban League on a day in and day out basis. They are pursuing that work aggressively. The Great Recession was very hard on the Urban League movement. It was very hard, particularly affiliates. all you have to be is operating affiliate in a town and have a lot of your support come from the United Way, and you can get banged around in the recession. So that's tough, but they continue that work, promoting entrepreneurship, very strong on issues of voter suppression, and using social media to get their word out. So I think the Urban League is vibrant and vital. It's not as noisy as some other organizations which have to be noisy. You have to have a division of labor. It's one of the things I think we need to understand about the constellation of groups that we need in a cause. They have tremendous institutional capacity, and I think my point about how we divvied up who was going to do what with the police is illustrative of the division of labor. The League has great expertise on policy, legislation, program, etc., and it's a strong advocate. There are others who are masters at organizing, pop-up demonstrations, etc., and you need a complementarity. So I think that is still
working on the police issue.
Pardon me?
Are you still working on the police issue, and how are you going to get with Sessions, who is for?
I'm not with the. I left the Urban League in 2003.
I know, but as you assess it.
Pardon me?
As you assess the Urban League, you know.
Oh, Mark and a group of other civil rights leaders have met with Sessions, and they're in the thick of this with the Congressional Black Caucus, et cetera, et cetera. So now if you were to go onto the website or read the latest issue of the State of Black America, they're all over the issues that they have to be. We're just in a time when, if you don't happen to catch them when they're on one of the 30 channels that carry public affairs and run 24 hours a day, you might not know, but they're in the thick of it, and the website is a good indication of it. But again, the paradigm about how you move forward has changed because we've got different kinds of organizations that have emerged, new generations of leaders that have emerged using strategies such as those used by Black Lives Matter, which have made an enormous difference. I mean, I will credit them. We have moved farther and faster on the issue of the police in the last 3 years than in all the previous 50 years that I was involved, for several reasons. One is the technology. When we were dealing with those issues of a wrongful shooting, it was, who said? Where's your evidence? And you also had the code of silence, so you couldn't even get to the police. No one could get to the police for 24 or 48 hours so they could clean up their story. So that's one thing. The technology has changed the evidentiary game. Second thing that's happened is the pop-up, highly disruptive demonstrations, which have made the lives of mayors and police chiefs absolutely miserable. And they can't manage cities with that kind of thing going on. And thirdly, I think a growing realization among more modern thinking police that you can't really do an effective job of policing communities if you're at war with those you're supposed to protect. And all of these incidents do that. So I think we've made a very impressive headway in the last couple of years. The interesting question on these issues going forward is there's a very different political climate out there now. Number two, I've read in some states that folks are trying to pass laws that make it very difficult to have disruptive demonstrations. And for example, that if somebody in a car plows down a demonstrator, maybe they won't be held liable. Or demonstrators are going to have to pay damages if there are lawsuits, et cetera. So I think we're in a much more repressive environment now. And it's interesting, I don't know where Black Lives Matter stands now, but it's definitely in a very different place in terms of what it's doing. So maybe they're reconnoitering now than it was a couple of years ago. But all of that said, we have moved the ball farther and faster in the last 2 or 3 years since the inception of Black Lives Matter than in the previous 50 years I was involved in this issue. Yeah.
Going back to your public television days, with the passing of our good friend Gwen Eichel, between 8 and 11 p.m. now on PBS, there are no oversee this new environment?
Try to hold public television to account. I mean, that's why, I don't know who does it now. I know the NAACP used to issue reports on presence of folks of color in various aspects of the media. So I think that they probably can't stand up to scrutiny, but if nobody's paying attention, then you can keep doing what you do. And as we all know, it's quite easy to regress to the way things once were. So I mean, I think that there are, whoever's in the business of monitoring the industry, and particularly public broadcasting, needs to hold them to account, report, meet, ask what you're going to do, apply pressure, and I think you'll get results, because if there's one industry that probably can't withstand public pressure on that, it's that one. But that's what I would do. And I don't know who will take it on, but that kind of oversight and monitoring is hugely important in all realms of life, and it's got to be part of the arsenal of the civil rights movement.
Well, Milton Coleman, who was sometimes a member of this group and is a journalist, is the ombudsman for CPP. So that would seem to be a natural.
And he could probably use some pressure.
Yes.
And some exposure.
Yes.
I mean, if someone were to do just a fact-based report on that and publish it probably would make the industry squirm pretty badly. Other questions? Yes?
Just as an American citizen, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Trump.
You would have to come up.
One from one American citizen to another? Lord have mercy, how did we get here? I have several thoughts on that. One, what were progressives who were hemming and hawing about Hillary thinking? And how did they think this was going to work out if she wasn't elected? What were we thinking? Not me, but what was anybody who was agonizing over this choice and whose values are progressive thinking? And they must not have been alive when Ralph Nader prevented Gore from being elected. So it was a binary election. I won't call out any of my friends who I saw on the Bill Maher show temporizing on this issue. But what were folks thinking, and what do they expect to happen? Number one. Number two, this president is loonier than I would ever have imagined. I think we're all dazzled to be charitable by what's going on. It's frightening. It's really frightening for this country to be in such a state with so much going on around the world. And the daily releases around 6 o'clock, I mean, I almost drove off the road today coming here. So this is, the Republicans are going to have to demonstrate some cojones, because we should be, you got to get the evidence, but we should be moving toward get this man out of here. But be very partisan. We know who you get if you get him out of here. But that would be better than the chaos that we have now. Third point I make is that when I initially joined the league, I read a really arresting book called The Road to Dominion by someone, their last name was Diamond, a scholar. And it was about how the far right got its act together after the Goldwater debacle in 1964. And how they merged military wargaming with Madison Avenue marketing and set out to take the country over state by state, school district by school district, vote on books by vote on books, step by step by step. And how they created the whole infrastructure of think tanks and all that, mimicking the civil rights movement. How they created their own foundations, mimicking the civil rights movement, calling and raising it. And she said the only thing that will slow them down is the propensity to overreach when they get too successful. And in many respects, George W. Bush arrived ahead of plan. But their plan was to take over the country state by state, district by district, et cetera, et cetera. And we've seen that. And the only way to stop that is through organizing. The only way to stop it is not just to focus on the presidential election, not just on the midterms, but on state elections, local elections, et cetera. And that's hard work, that's groundwork, that's that in the trenches stuff that is not exotic. But it's got to be done. And we need to be mindful, to make you a very partisan statement, we need to be mindful of how hard it is and the resources that are required. I am very encouraged by the emergence of Black Lives Matter, obviously, by, as I mentioned, by the Women's March, by groups like Indivisible. I think that's powerful stuff that's going on right now. A third point I make is that we need very strong journalistic organizations, very strong advocacy and litigating organizations. On January 1st, my wife and I sat down and we reviewed our charitable giving, and we totally changed our charitable giving. And we said we're going to give money to to the extent of our budget, to groups with megaphones, microphones, and lawyers, so they can get in there and engage and do battle, because I think some ugly stuff is coming. It's been uglier than I would have expected. So in a sense, you have to have this robust advocacy and litigating work that's sort of in silos, fighting this set of issues, this set of issues, this set of issues. At a higher altitude, the issue I really worry about is in a virulently partisan atmosphere like we have now, how do we build some commonality in this country again? How do we put Humpty Dumpty back together again? How do we learn to talk to one another? How do we learn to compromise? Because otherwise we will just be at each other's throats in perpetuity. And I don't see many politicians operating at a national level, hopefully they'll emerge, who can talk the American people through that. Certainly that's not what Trump has been about. It's not what some hyper-partisan folks have been about. And I think that new sensibility of shared interests, shared sacrifice, shared circumstances has got to come up from the ground. As people who are in similar circumstances understand the games that have been run on them. When I was growing up, they used to talk about how leaders who are trying to distract people from their pain would demonize others and call it demon theory of organizing. Mao used to do that by demonizing America. Stalin used to demonize America. We demonize people. And that was a way of getting people to glance away from their own circumstances, get whites to glance away from the commonality of circumstances with people of color and vice versa. So, you know, we always wonder, well, what if people could vote their interests and recognize the shared investment that we have and the shared sense of what needs to be done in order to help people move forward. We're not there, and I pray that a new generation of leadership emerges that will help this country get there, otherwise we'll be at loggerheads in perpetuity, and that would be very sad. Lastly, I'd say that, and I close the book by saying that I hope that my generation stands down. We've had the stage, and that we ought to exit stage right or stage left, get in the cheerleading section and write checks, and let the 30, 40, and 50-year-olds take over. It's one of the reasons I stepped down from the league. Everything was going really well, but there are always new challenges, new strategies, new capabilities that have to be brought to bear on any struggle, and I think it's time for people of a certain age to yield the stage. And with the emergence of Black Lives Matters and the Women's March and Individual, you see a changing of the guard underway right now, and it's very exciting, very exciting. So I'm very hopeful, but I think we're in for a really rocky time, especially if all of this confusion leads toward an effort to impeach Trump. It's going to be, because he's going to be out on the road trying to stop that. This is going to be, Mr. Nixon was not charismatic. This guy will not go quietly into the night. So, and hopefully no one will try to take advantage of this country's turmoil. I really worry about that. Any other questions?
Yeah, speaking of politics, as we sit here right now, there's a CNN-sponsored debate going on as we speak. CNN is showing the debate between John Kasich and Bernie Sanders right now. What do you think of those two, Bernie and John Kasich, Governor Kasich?
I mean, I just to start with Kasich, impressive, non-charismatic guy. Probably too good for the Republican Party at this point in time. He's conservative, but he's rational and sensible, and I suspect that if we had Kasich now, everybody would breathe a hearty sigh of relief. Bernie was remarkable, kind of came out of nowhere. I thought what he accomplished was utterly amazing. I thought that he stayed in the game too long and temporized a bit too much with Hillary, and I think that hurt her. So that was illustrative of the point I was trying to make, and I'm speaking more about his supporters. I wish that there had been full-throated support. I'm out of here, let's go elect her. But I understand. I mean, what happened to him was probably totally unexpected. But he in his agenda showed the potential for helping people across ethnic lines understand their mutual interests, their shared interests. I thought he was quite remarkable that way. And there's some very interesting books out there which would suggest that, well, not just about him, but folks have probably been really reading Hillbilly Elegy, and I read a remarkable book recently called Earning the Rockies. A journalist drove from one coast to the other, and he particularly commented on what it's like in between the mountain ranges. Fascinating. So I think we're getting a deeper understanding of the circumstances of people who were disaffected from both parties, actually. Lastly, I'd say on that point, about 25 years ago, William Julius Wilson wrote a remarkable book called When Work Disappears. The essence of his finding was that if you think there's dysfunction in inner city African-American neighborhoods because of joblessness, you wait until that happens to the majority community. You ain't seen dysfunction. And that's where we are now. It took 25 years, but that's where we are now. Because dysfunction, hardship coupled with a sense of entitlement is a very difficult thing to handle. But that just means there's a great opportunity to help people see their common interests if there are any politicians who can figure out how to do that. So that's what I'd say. I mean, I was very disappointed in the election. I thought that the Democrats lost it. Anybody who's played sports, I think, knows that if you let it be close, at the end of the game, you can lose. So you don't want it even to be close, and it got close, I think, to the amazement of everyone, which tells us the country was in a place that a lot of us didn't understand. Very painful.
I would like since I assume we talking in the Democratic Party.
Yeah,
I've never been able to understand how Bernie Sanders ended up in a Democratic primary. The man is a registered independent. How did he end up? How did the Democrats let someone who's a registered independent be running in that primary? I've never been able to understand. I've never gotten any.
Well, I think all they had to do is get on the ballot in the states. You can't. I mean, the process is much more open than it ever was. The parties don't control the process the way they used to. So I think all he needed, I'm not an expert on this, but I think all he needed was signatures to get on the ballot. With his organizing prowess, he got on there easily. There's no way to keep him off the ballot. I mean, how did Trump get on the Republican ballot? He's no Republican. He's been everything. So you got the days of the party and the bosses and the DNC and the RNC controlling the process are kind of gone, and that's how an insurgent candidate can get in there. Ross Perot was running for president on the Republican ticket years ago.
Well, he didn't run as a Republican.
Yeah, but he wasn't. Yeah, but I think I think if you get the signatures, you can get on the ballot. I don't think there was a way for the parties. I could be wrong. There may be people who understand this process. I don't. I'm not an expert on it. But I don't think you could bar, if he got the signatures to get on the ballot, I don't think you could keep him off just because he's not a registered this. I could be wrong.
But I understand that, but I'm saying it's not getting on the ballot. But how can you get on under a name of a party? I can see you getting on the ballot as an independent, getting on the ballot as whatever. But how can you run under the banner of a party of which you are not a member?
Well, if you collect, I would think that if you collect enough signatures from Democratic voters, you can get on the ballot. But we'd have to defer to somebody who really understands the rules. I don't understand the rules.
I've asked so many people, no one is going to give an answer that I.
Yeah, but it didn't. It wasn't an issue. That's all I can say. So it must be okay. Must be okay.
So,
yeah.
looking back at the last 3 years during the Obama administration, I'm interested in sort of your assessment in terms of how do you think history will judge his presidency in terms of with regard to the nation's urban agenda, things that we particularly care about: education, civil rights, justice, economic opportunity.
I think we need to be clear about what the starting point was. It was the Great Recession. The country was in a mess. On his watch, the country emerged from the mess. Jobs were created, unemployment rates declined. Presidents are always entitled to take credit for that if it happens on their watch. And they spent a lot of money in the stimulus package to help make that happen. So I think historians will be kind to him on that. It did not address the continuing decline of the middle class. Those are major structural economic issues that no politician in the last 40 years has figured out how to deal with. And it certainly wasn't arrested on his watch. But there were significant economic gains on his watch and reemployment of people. I think that the Affordable Care Act, who knows how much it will survive, will go down as a major legislative achievement, extending health care to people who didn't have it, pre-existing conditions, et cetera, but obviously a lot of issues there, but that's be a huge legislative accomplishment. He spent billions of dollars on trying to improve education in this country. Unfortunately, not with a whole lot to show for it, but maybe on the order of magnitude of $5-7 billion on school improvement initiatives, particularly in urban areas and underperforming areas. If there'd been more to show for it, it's a very tough field, as anybody knows. There'd be quite a legacy there. And as I've said, if folks had that work, it would be a crowning achievement vis-a-vis our community and citizens. I think where historians are likely to be hardest on him is on the international affairs. I think that who knows how this business with North Korea will pan out, but there wasn't a whole lot of progress there. There wasn't a lot of progress in the Middle East. The Middle East is almost impossible to try to figure out how to manage. Probably won't be kind to him on Syria. So I think the international assessments will be a bit tougher. When it comes to the dignity of the office, the intelligence of the execution of the role. One of the geniuses of Ronald Reagan was he knew how to act the role of president. The Obamas were brilliant at that, and all you need to do is look at what we're looking at right now, which is the antithesis of that. So he stands out in sharp relief there. So I think people will be nostalgic. It may be that historians will be fairer and kinder when they say the international scene was just, it's unmanageable. So I think historians will be kind. I am working my way through finally a biography of Harry Truman that David McCullough wrote, and it's fascinating, and I've learned a lot about him I didn't know. It's 800 pages, so it's a long. I mean, I have to pause every 200 days to read a baseball book and then go back to it. It's got to rest the brain, you know. But it's quite remarkable. But you know, Obama was president during some very complicated time. But I mean, it's important to remember the country was in the crapper when he took over, and of course, the Republicans vowed not to let him accomplish anything. So he was up against more virulent, well-organized, take no survivors opposition than most presidents have ever faced. So for those reasons, I think that he will be kind. And I think the record on trying to, when they got rolling on trying to deal with a lot of the police abuses with Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder, I think they made a lot of headway with their investigations and consent decrees, and feeding off of the energy and the pressure that was applied by Black Lives Matter. I think they made some definite headway there. What he didn't do was a whole lot of, I'm the president of the black people. I'm black, I'm the president of black people. Well, I can't think of a black agenda that he could have gotten through Congress. He could get a school improvement agenda through Congress. He could get healthcare reform through Congress with a lot of pulling and shoving. But in a specific African American agenda would have been impossible. Bill Clinton did not have an African American agenda. It should be mentioned. So Obama made that call. I think historians will be kind and generous toward him, and he did not have an Iraq war on his watch. That kind of debacle did not have the chaos that Trump is creating on his watch. So I understand the criticism of him, but I think the accomplishments are extraordinary.
Okay, well, last question. Okay.
In the area of education, one thing that occurs to me that's really lacking is most Americans seem not to have a clue about how the government works. And what we used to call civics in school. And aside from the fact that people don't have any thinking skills, but they really don't know. And how important do you think this will be in the coming days with the chaos of the Trump administration if his supporters have no idea what obstruction of justice means or have no idea the role of Congress?
I think that's a huge concern. I think we've been so obsessed with testing and accountability in the last 20 years that there's a lot that the schools don't do. There's a lot that they've sacrificed in terms of curriculum and instruction. Children don't even write in many schools. I had a young man who interned with us when I was with the league, and he just finished his freshman year at Amherst, which is my school. And he dropped by one day. I admired him. He just walked into the office and sat down. Yeah, brother. Good for you. And I asked him how the first year was going, and he said freshman English had kicked his behind. I said, kicked mine too. I write about that in the book. Got a C- in freshman English. I went up to see my professor at the end of the semester, and the professor said to me, Mr. Price, you seem not to have gotten the point of this course. And I said, Professor, that's the first thing we've agreed on all semester. But this young man told me something. I asked him, what kind of writing did you do in high school? And he'd gone, not to Bronx High School Science, but regular high school. And what kinds of courses did you take? He had taken 3 advanced placement courses. English, civics, and something else, something like that. 1 science, 2 sort of social science. He said they had us write 500-word essays so we could get over on the test. No term papers, nothing requiring research and analysis. So young people who come out of school without a grasp on civics or without the analytical and research and writing skills, for me that's child abuse. That means it's not that they don't know how to do it, they're not being asked to do it, encouraged to do it, or nurtured to do it. So I think we've got a lot of issues in schools. I'm currently on a National Commission on Social and Emotional Development, and one of the other missing things in schools is attending to the social and emotional needs of young people who have a hard time in school, particularly. I'm hopeful, ironically, that in this era where there's going to be less pressure from the federal government on the schools, that they will be able to breathe again, and that teachers and principals will be able to pay more attention to the needs of children instead of the needs of politicians who are imposing all these tests. I couldn't do it, but the commission was out in Cleveland the week before last, looking at how they deal with social emotional development. They said that between the state and the district and something else, they administer 42 tests per year per student. Can you imagine a test a week, a standardized test a week? Which means that you gotta prepare the kids for the test. It's insane. It's insane. So there are a lot of issues in education, and I think educators gotta be given more breathing room to do what they know how to do. And civics is certainly a big part of it.
Okay. All right, well, let's give them back. And we'll let them eat his dessert, but people can come up and talk if they want.
I have a book, it's on sale. I have no shame. It's available at bookstores, it's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all that, so.
And anybody who hasn't given me their the money for the check, that would be nice. I gotta get paid now.
Okay.